Hello, this is Dr. Tom O'Brien. Welcome to Betrayal, the autoimmune solution they're not telling you. I'm about to take you on a journey around the world, discovering the underlying mechanism to practically every degenerative disease, to cardiovascular disease, to cancers, practically every disease. Why does it appear that our bodies are betraying us and we get sick? You're about to discover the cause of autoimmune disease and its true solution. This is Betrayal, the autoimmune solution they're not telling you. You're going to learn from over 85 of the world's foremost experts, including scientific researchers who are considered the fathers and the godfathers in the field of autoimmunity. And importantly, you will hear from people that have turned their autoimmune conditions around and found optimal health. These are dire, life-destroying conditions that most people never recover from. Lupus, colitis, Crohn's, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, diabetes, skin conditions like psoriasis, and also degenerative brain diseases, including Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. You're about to find out what the true root causes are to these terrible diseases, what turns your body on to develop a disease, as well as what you can do to prevent them from happening to you. If you or a loved one is suffering from a specific autoimmune disease, you're about to learn the specific protocols you can use to stop it in its tracks, reverse it, and totally take away your symptoms. This is not just theory. You'll learn from doctors who have successfully treated patients with these powerful approaches and patients who have reversed life-threatening autoimmune diseases themselves. And you'll be discovering the real truth behind why losing weight has become literally impossible for so many. You'll see why so many suffer the shame of experiencing drastic hair loss. You'll understand why people are getting skin disorders that can't be explained by conventional medicine, much less treated. You'll also see why your memory may be getting so bad. I wish I could tell you that you could knock on your local doctor's office and get the answers. But unfortunately, the statistics show us that the root causes and true solutions are very rarely coming from these sources of authority. The brutal reality is, on autoimmune disease, modern medicine doesn't have the answers. Sadly, something like gut bacteria has been understood as something to be gotten rid of by doctors. And this one false paradigm has put us in an autoimmune hell, where many of us have lost our best friend in defending against disease, our gut microbiome. Industries bent on financial gain at the expense of lives have released harmful triggers into our environment, and destructive substances have been added to our food, our water, and the products we use each day. You're also going to learn the things that they're doing to us that are causing this slew of symptoms. The truth is, autoimmune disease destroys lives. It takes us away from our loved ones, stops us from experiencing the most precious moments in life. It leaves so many vibrant, loving, and ambitious men, women, and children locked behind closed doors, in pain, debilitated, and ashamed for what's happening inside their bodies they can't explain. No one can explain it. In order to bring you Betrayal, I've had the privilege of teaming up with experienced film and documentary director and producer Jonathan Otto. Jonathan has dialed down on this subject more than I could have hoped for, and he has dedicated his life to alleviating suffering through his work and has a profound ability to understand and capture what the true impacts of autoimmune disease really is. He believes that it's time for the world to see what families are experiencing, the pain and suffering, as well as the joy and fulfillment that comes the day that you turn your condition around. Jonathan and I, with our film crew, have teamed together and traveled across the country and all around the world, through England and Portugal and Germany and Spain and Brazil, to gather the stories, pull back the curtains on the lies, and reveal the truth about autoimmune disease. Here in episode 1, you're going to learn from the experts what is autoimmune disease. You'll meet the godfather of predictive autoimmunity from Israel, Professor Yehuda Schonfeld. You'll meet the godfather of functional medicine, Dr. Jeffrey Bland. Dr. Mark Hyman, who chairs the effort of taking functional medicine to Cleveland Clinic. Microbiome expert Dr. Michael Ash from England, and many more. We're about to break the silence on this heartbreaking package of diseases. Get ready. Here we go.
Well, autoimmunity is a whole spectrum of disorders that all have very common roots, even though they show up in different parts of the body. And if you look at autoimmunity, it affects 80 million people in this country. When you lump them all together, from Hashimoto's thyroid disease, to MS, to inflammatory bowel disease, to rheumatoid arthritis, to psoriatic arthritis. And the whole spectrum of disorders are seen often as very separate things. But we now know that autoimmunity has common roots, that it's the body attacking itself, and that there's a reason for it. And unfortunately, most common therapies are designed to suppress or block the body's own immune system instead of figuring out why it's so pissed off in the first place.
It's kind of generally known, the concept of autoimmune is that the immune system is reacting against the body itself. So it's like an automatic process of the body rejecting itself. And it really seems like that's a very strange thing for our immune system to turn rogue against our host tissues and start to damage them. So it really, for decades for me, in fact, I could say going back certainly into the 60s in my background, I've always wondered about the term autoimmune. It just didn't seem reasonable that suddenly an immune system that was there to protect us against the outside world suddenly turns rogue and starts attacking ourselves. There had to be a precipitating event. There had to be something, it seemed, that would translate goodness to collateral damage to our body. And the more that I got thinking about that, the more I started asking myself, well, what are the diagnostic criteria that are used for picking out these conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis or systemic lupus erythematosus or myasthenia gravis or thyroiditis, and there's 88 different diagnoses for these conditions that hit different tissues in our body and keep allergists, immunologists, and internists very busy because you've got all these hosts of different diagnoses of the immune system of our body turning rogue against specific tissues that then gives to these different diagnoses. And I thought, well, how do we diagnose this? And they're diagnosed by looking at the presence of what are called autoantibodies. And I thought, well, what is an autoantibody? And we say, well, it's an antibody that our immune system produces against our own tissue, like anti-thyroidal antibody, or anti-mucosal antibody, or anti-brain lipid antibody with respect to multiple sclerosis. And I think our body is actually looking at these native parts of our plumbing and our machinery, and it's saying, oh, I'm sorry, suddenly you're a foreigner, and I'm going to produce a destructive thing from part of my immune system called the B cells that is going to attack those tissues specifically. And then I got thinking this a little farther. Well, just a minute. Are we sure that those tissues that we say the immune system is responding to are the host tissues that were the same as when those tissues were first generated? Or is there something going on that makes those tissues look like they're a foreigner? And that little kind of question that I had, which started as a kind of a virus in my central nervous system somewhere in the 1980s, just continued to kind of fulminate as I was reading the literature and thinking about it, until I finally came to the belief that our body actually doesn't respond to itself. It's responding to something that happens to our body that makes it a non-self. Now that is kind of a paradigm shifting concept, right?
From my eyes, it's a misfire between what our immune system wants to do and what it should be doing. And sometimes it seems to me almost like that when we lived in a more pristine, more traditional culture, where we lived close to the earth and where we had parasites and where we ate food that was fresh and we didn't have refrigerators and things spoiled, the immune system had a lot of really good things to do. And now the immune system in our modern culture feels to me a lot like a group of teenagers with time on their hands.
That's a great analogy. It's really good.
And so they get into mischief because they don't have their old jobs to do. And also the immune system, if you look at Polly Matson's work, it's about not just strangers, but dangerous strangers. So when we walk down a street or we're in a conference like we are here, there are a lot of strangers, but we think they're friends. They're not dangerous strangers. And
yes.
The immune system's job is not to react most of the time. And we're exposed to toxins. We eat foods that are unusual. We're stressed out. We have molds, we have all kinds of unusual situations that are really different than even 150 years ago. And the immune system, it just kind of overreacts. Sometimes I say it's like it's your birthday and everybody's singing happy birthday and you've got the cake, the candles are lit, and everybody's expecting you to just blow out the candles and you whip out your fire extinguisher. That's an autoimmune disease. It's an overreaction of the immune system just to a normal event.
Autoimmunity is a process where the immune cells begin attacking self and attacking normal, healthy, vibrant tissue, causing damage. And over time, we've been converting many of our chronic diseases into possibly immune, probably autoimmune, and then definitely autoimmune in nature. I would predict that another 20, 30 years, the vast majority of our chronic diseases will have been reclassified as probably autoimmune in nature.
When is it normal for the immune system to be attacking self?
So the immune system, our immune cells, have a very important function. They're involved in maintaining and repairing the body. So if my overtrained and I've damaged my muscles from overuse, my immune cells have to come in and dissolve that damage, mop it up, and repair. If I have trauma, my immune cells have to come in and repair that trauma. Or if I'm damaged from infection, they will again come in, mop up the damage, and repair. So they're a vital part of maintenance and repair of everyday and acute damage. When it becomes pathologic is when they're attacking healthy tissue, or when during the repair phase that attack continues once the repair has been complete.
That's a brilliant overview of the function of the immune system, and none of our guests have talked about the repair phase, and that explains why sometimes you have to be able to get rid of the old damaged cells. And
it's vital. We need to do that when there's damage from infection, from trauma, from overuse,
or even exercise, like a bicep.
Absolutely. And when we strength train, we are intentionally damaging our muscles just a bit. So my immune cells have to come in, repair the damage, and rebuild a stronger muscle cell, a stronger tendon, a stronger bone. And so it's a vital part of our ongoing healthy vitality.
So it's a good thing for the immune system to be getting rid of our old cells, our damaged cells, but then it gets to be threatening when the immune system is getting rid of more cells than it should be.
Correct. And when it's getting rid of cells that are otherwise healthy and vital, when, for example, I've developed an immune response to an infection, we've cleared out that infection, that clone should be wiped out and eliminated.
If you think of our defense system, it's there to protect us from foreigners trying to get in, or those that get in, and also to protect us from things that go wrong inside ourselves.
Yes.
And so we have to have a way of distinguishing self from non-self. And when that's working well, when our defense system's doing its job, then everything just hums along just like riding in a Rolls Royce. But there are certain things that occur in our lives that start to interfere with that ability for us to distinguish self from non-self. And when the defense system, or what we call the immune system, starts to lose that ability, then it starts to react or attack things that it shouldn't be attacking, like self. And that to me is autoimmunity.
The lack of awareness on the underlying autoimmune mechanism creates both the tragedy of premature death, as well as people being robbed of the quality of life that's important to us all. Have our immune systems betrayed us? The answer to that question will shock you. People are looking in the wrong direction when searching for the solutions of autoimmune diseases. We're quite literally in the dark ages in thinking that this is all about genetics and medication. You will learn more about that in the upcoming interviews with world experts. In this series, you're going to learn some information in the upcoming episodes on that very topic, so you can find what the true enemy is and how you can ensure that your body is never attacking itself. So how widespread really is this issue? How many people are truly affected by this villainous group of diseases? What about other countries? You're about to find out some important answers to these questions that will bring you an awareness of what autoimmune disease actually is and what you can do about it.
Autoimmune disease is no longer a silent killer. I mean, it's everywhere. Some 70 to 80 million people in the US are currently diagnosed, or either diagnosed or have yet to be diagnosed with autoimmune disease. Look across Europe, the numbers of AI, autoimmune disease instances are increasing all the time.
Dr. Ash, can you tell us how widespread this issue truly is?
Well, certainly for North America, the NIH suggests that there are 24 million people in the US that have been diagnosed with autoimmune disease, but they also point out that perhaps it's only 1 in 3 that have been picked up. So let's say between 70 and 80 million people in North America currently have autoimmune disorders.
If you take like a classic autoimmune disease model like inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis or Crohn's or something akin to that, the best estimates on what the incidence was in the Western world, like let's say in the United States at the turn of the 20th century, 1900, it was about 1 in 10,000 individuals. And now it's 1 in 250.
Yes.
250.
Yes.
So that's an unbelievable change in a very remarkably short amount of time from an evolutionary perspective. It's not that our genes changed that much in 100 years.
This is why you called it a modern epidemic.
It is a modern epidemic, and it's really mostly acute in the last 30 years. And when you think about how much our environment has changed, how many new chemicals, how many new pesticides and herbicides and flame retardants, and a million chemicals that are response modifiers in the body. We know they're endocrine or hormonal disruptors, but they can disrupt a lot of different metabolic processes in the body. And we know that certain toxins, particularly, for instance, like transitional metals like mercury and lead and things like that, they can actually glob onto sulfur units on the end of our host proteins, our own tissue. And now the immune system looks at that protein as a foreign protein, looks at it as a hapten, and now you get an autoimmune response against your own tissue because of a toxin.
It's increased threefold over the last 50 years. There are somewhere between 50 and 75 million Americans with autoimmunity that have been actually diagnosed, and 150 million worldwide. And those are the people that know. I mean, in autoimmunity, these antibodies are thought to come out at least 5 years before the actual disease does. And it takes people 6 to 10 doctors to actually get diagnosed. So this autoimmune process is going on well before it's gotten to the point where someone has overt disease. So it's hundreds of millions of people with autoimmunity, or that are what I call in my book being on this autoimmune spectrum of having these antibodies but not having diagnosed with full-blown disease yet.
You talk about the damage building up, and then eventually the symptoms will occur. And that damage is the period where the antibodies are elevated, they're attacking the tissue, but there are no symptoms. And that's the prodromal period. And we've spoken before about Melissa Arbuckle's study looking at lupus patients in the VA and how she found that every single lupus patient had those 7 antibodies of lupus, all 7 of them elevated years and years before there was ever a symptom. So the idea of looking to see, is there an autoimmune mechanism going on while the person may feel fine? What do you think about that concept?
I love the idea of having an early warning, because knowing whether or not we have antibodies that might predispose us, or that might be the early signs of developing autoimmune disease, that gives us time to start dealing with all of the environmental factors that we have a great amount of control over that are also contributors to that disease. So autoimmune disease is not just about an autoantibody forming, an antibody that can attack our bodies. But it's also about an immune system that can't regulate itself, that's overstimulated to attack. And that occurs when we're not getting enough nutrients in our diets, when we're stressed, when we're not getting enough sleep, when we have gut dysbiosis and leaky gut, when we're consuming foods that we're having intolerance reactions to, that are priming the immune system, or we're consuming foods that are highly inflammatory. It can happen with infection, it can happen with toxin exposure. So when we can have that warning, hey look, something bad's gonna happen down the road, kind of similar to how pre-diabetics know that they need to change diet and lifestyle to avoid type 2 diabetes. It's the same thing. It gives us that ability to start making changes and prevent the disease from developing.
I first awoke to the possibility of putting a through my own experience, right? As is almost always the case for doctors who, go rogue. They do so because they have had an experience that has shown them a greater version of the truth than they were exposed to through their pharma-funded education, right? And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's postpartum about 9 months after my first pregnancy, and had never had a health condition in my life, had been living really largely recklessly from a health perspective, literally eating McDonald's, drinking Red Bull, and eating candy every day, never exercised, was a resident, never sleeping, and not only never sleeping, but then I would go out clubbing several nights a week, and it was like, never even a thought that there would be a comeuppance, right? That there would be any consequence to that. So when I was diagnosed, I sort of saw it as a massive inconvenience, and I thought the idea of having to take a prescription for the rest of my life was just a total pain I didn't want to deal with, right? And I went to a naturopath, not because I believed in alternative medicine, actually, or even had anything, kind to say about it, but because I knew it was the only way out, because I knew what conventional medicine had to offer me, and I knew that that was a lifelong prescription, right? So it was through simple changes, going gluten and dairy free, taking a number of antioxidants, vitamins and minerals, for example, and then beginning to recommit to exercise, that I watched my numbers go from the high 2000s and thyroid antibodies to the normal range in a period of months. And I watched my TSH go from 20 to normal in that same time frame. And a lot of red flags were raised for me, right? And I said, hold on a minute, I never learned that food had anything to do with medicine. And I never learned that you could put a chronic autoimmune disease into remission, that was even possible. So it was, very invigorating for me, and it really ignited in me a fire to learn. And so I hit the books, right? And I became really interested in functional medicine. But at the time when I was going through my autoimmunity, I didn't know about functional medicine. And so I went through conventional treatment. I had Graves' disease, which is an overactive thyroid, an autoimmune disease of my thyroid. And very long story short, after being on toxic medication that nearly caused my liver to fail, and then ultimately having my thyroid ablated with iodine 131, I no longer have a thyroid. So, it's really my mission and my passion to help people to never have to be in my boat.
I had a gentleman earlier this year. He'd been to 60 different dermatologists. He had such a rare form of autoimmune skin rash that one of the dermatologists invited him to a conference and asked him if he would sit in. And he sat in, and for 4 hours, all the dermatologists at this conference came in and were looking at him, trying to figure out what he had. And you know what he had? He had gluten sensitivity. And it was triggering an autoimmune response. And it was coming out in his skin. And we were able to get rid of that rash that 60 doctors, 60, couldn't figure out. We were able to get rid of it in less than 6 months. And that's the power of food. That's the power of diet change. That's the power of nutrition. And that's why I wish more doctors would study it.
All the doctors were looking in the wrong place.
Well,
they were they were looking for the answer, but they weren't looking. I would consider that probably it's possible that not a single one of them even assessed diet as being the cause for the skin reaction.
Not even a thought. The closest anyone even came to the proper diagnosis, one of the doctors thought it might be a formaldehyde allergy, which at least he was thinking allergy. But it wasn't. And nutrition is so fundamental. And when we look to seek what these doctors were doing, they were looking at his skin and they were trying to give it a name, right? Instead of, and that's the way it is in medicine. So many doctors are so hell-bent on trying to give things names and classifications that they forget to treat the patient.
So is it surprising to you that the third leading cause of death in this country is medical errors called iatrogenic diseases? Think about all the advancements we've made as a civilization. Hasn't there been so much with our healthcare in our modern world that has improved? Absolutely. My first granddaughter was born this last summer, and she was born 7 weeks premature. And she was in Northwestern's neonatal intensive care for 2 months. Thank God for the technology we've got today. She wouldn't have made it, or I question whether she would have made it if we didn't have the sophistication and the technology that we have. It was marvelous. I was so impressed with what I saw there. And now she's healthy and vibrant, and I just got a text today that she laughed for the first time today, which is really a big step for first parents and first grandparents, right? How can we be so archaic on the biggest killer? Why is it that we are taking steps backwards? As you continue to learn in this series, you can work out how you can swim against the tide and not allow any of these drastic statistics involve you or your family. You can control your own destiny. So what's the answer to the lack of help we're getting with the modern healthcare system? If you are suffering with a condition that you know is due to nutritional deficiencies or harmful dietary triggers, how are you going to put your trust in a healthcare practitioner that has a total of 4 to 8 hours of nutritional training in all of their coursework? What if you've suffered trauma and you're trying to work out how to reverse the impacts of that and its detriment to your health? Where do you turn to? The truth is, you need a credible solution that has the best of what modern medicine offers, with a thorough knowledge of the alternative protocols that you may desperately need. Is functional medicine the answer?
Autoimmunity, autoimmune disease, this spectrum that we have that is around this reaction that we have towards ourself and autoinflammation, where there's an inflammatory process that's arising. You know, we see this within a triad of the balance of what's happening with environmental exposure, our genetic predisposition, intestinal permeability, and the inflammatory upregulation that we tend to have in our bodies because of our diets and toxin exposure and the many different things that are going on. These lead to the immune system being activated in a way that is dysfunctional. It's out of balance and ends up attacking part of us. Depending upon our genetic predispositions, different tissues may be attacked. Different symptoms may occur. Symptoms may change in individuals over time depending upon what the exposures are. And so we see this process of autoimmunity having a detrimental effect. We get caught up in naming all the ways in which it shows symptoms and disease, but really it's a huge umbrella of many, many different kinds of diseases. Functional medicine makes a difference because it doesn't focus on the disease. It focuses and says, why? What's under that? What's the root cause? And how do we begin to make changes in that?
I think there's a fundamental lifestyle approach that everybody needs to look at whenever they have an autoimmune condition, whether that's Hashimoto's, whether that's multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, and that's looking at the root causes. So what are the triggers? What are the predispositions? What are the habits in my life that are leading me to manifest this condition?
So it's a whole host of factors that interacts with our genetics depending on our environment and our genes that trigger our particular problem, right? So there's variability in the population so that the same insults can cause many different autoimmune diseases. So there are only 3 main triggers for autoimmune disease with a couple of add-ons, right? Diet and stress always influence every disease, right? But the main 3 triggers are allergens, microbes, and toxins. And as functional medicine practitioners, our expertise is being able to drill down into each of these areas and discover in any particular person what's driving that problem. So you can have 10 people with a particular autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, which have 10 different causes.
Those of us that practice functional medicine have a very diverse client base that come to see us because they've traditionally been failed by allopathic medicine or they've not gotten the relief or the answers that they're looking for. And I do feel that in that patient population, that your predictive value of being a positive autoimmune issue is very high, much higher than what a primary care doctor would see.
Yes.
And your point of these issues being manifest before we develop a coding system to label them, a great example is rheumatoid arthritis. Before you have joint changes seen on x-ray, there's a blood test called the CCP antibody that's positive 5 years before there's a clinical manifestation. So our sensing mechanisms and our testing strategies are currently evolving to the point where we can now find these early signs of autoimmunity. And I feel that we'll have panels that incorporate cytokines or inflammatory markers that are going to show us this imbalance way before the clinical condition manifests. And if we can catch it in that window and develop a plan of individualized, personalized therapy, we may be able to get it so it doesn't manifest into a full-blown autoimmune disease. And that's the exciting thing about what we're doing right now in functional medicine.
Yeah, because a lot of people will say, oh, you know, my mother has Hashimoto, she's on thyroid replacement, and my older sister is, and my aunts were, so I'm just going to get it.
Right.
Well, if you do what they did, you probably will, right? Because you probably have that genetic predisposition. You might have that HLA pattern or whatever in your immune system. There's whole arrays of predictive autoantibody testing that we can do. And, you know, they're used in conventional medicine, but here's how they're used. We wait until someone develops all the clinical signs and symptoms of autoimmune disease X, and then we say, oh, well, looks like you have lupus, or looks like you have rheumatoid arthritis from the joint dysfunction and the anatomical derangement and everything else, and we have these inflammatory markers high. So we're going to confirm our suspicion by doing this antibody test, right? When in reality, medical research has shown that these antibodies are in that person's blood 5, 10, 15 years before.
Years.
So if you, so instead of using them to confirm what you already know, let's turn that on its ear and let's use them prophylactically and upstream. Let's test them in a screening methodology, just like you would go and get a blood chemistry or a lipid panel.
Autoimmune diseases, like other diseases, atherosclerosis, cancer, they are multifactorial. There is no one factor which determines if you will get the disease. And therefore, it's the combination of factors which join together in concert to induce the disease. There are many factors. There are genetic factors, there are hormonal factors. 75% of the diseases prevail in female. It means that they have something, a risk factor in their body which enhances the immune system so that they will develop autoimmune disease. There are immune deficiency factors, and there are also the environmental factors. Today we try to understand better the environmental factor, and the combination and the concert of these factors will lead to the different diseases. This explains A, why in the same family you have people with different autoimmune diseases. B, why somebody who has already one disease will develop a second of autoimmune disease.
We see patients in all problems in all walks of life, and we look at all the reasons why they may not be functioning properly. So, for example, a nutritional deficiency, a toxin overload, musculoskeletal or neurological imbalance, things like this. So we do primary care, and we also have really good relations with other healthcare professionals to refer when appropriate. So, for example, I got basic training in spinal assessment, spinal manipulation, but it's not my area of expertise. I have chiropractors who are good friends of mine. I say, this is clearly in your realm, you take care of it, and send them back to me, I'll work on their diet.
And I have friends where I live who are naturopathic physicians, and when someone asks me, who should I see? I send them there first, because my experience of naturopaths is that they look at the diet, they look at nutrient insufficiencies, they look at musculoskeletal, and usually refer it out because that's not a real strength for them, but they recognize it. So it sounds like naturopathic physicians are more of a holistic, if I can use that term, or big picture view type of practitioner.
In many ways, we're very similar to the family doctor of old, and that is we have really strong relations with our patients and their families, and we spend more time with them because we want to understand why they're sick, not just that they are sick. So yes, we diagnose disease, and we do physical exam, we do laboratory tests and x-rays, all those things to diagnose what's going on, but rather than say, okay, now let's give them a drug, we say, well, no, are there some natural approaches we can take to help the body heal itself? So rather than a drug to turn off the symptom, and the problem with most of the drugs is they just turn off the symptoms, they don't deal with why people are sick. We want to know why they're sick. And almost always it's either a nutritional deficiency or, unfortunately now, an environmental toxin. We have become so toxic in our modern world that I am now lecturing literally all over the world that toxicity is now the primary driver of chronic disease in all the industrialized world.
Have you ever been to the doctor and you list a couple of the symptoms you're experiencing? Then you're trying to make sure you don't forget anything. You're desperately trying to give the doctor all the information they're needing. And maybe you feel rushed, and sometimes maybe even like you're being herded to a generic solution. What about your unique history? What about things that have happened in your personal experience, perhaps in your childhood, that could be the causative factor for what you're experiencing? They're critically important. Why has functional medicine proven to be so effective? So what's the underlying principle of functional medicine? Let me help you understand the foundational concept of functional medicine.
What's the typical patient that comes in to see you?
Well, they have many complaints together. They have they want to lose weight, they have migraines or headaches, they have allergies like sinusitis, rhinitis, they have gut problems like constipation, bloating, and like all the body is being attacked. It looks like that all the body is being attacked by something they don't know. They have no idea what's going on.
And how do you find what's going on for them?
Oh, I make several questionnaires and several blood tests as well, so we can then figure it out. And of course, we have to make many questions about what they eat, their daily habits, how much they sleep, if they have vacation, how much hours of work during the day. And so we put all this information together in the matrix, and then we can realize what's going on. But questionnaires and blood tests and saliva and everything, it's very important for putting everything together.
Functional medicine looks very comprehensively at the patient's history, and so we have it's rather a long questionnaire, but it's very comprehensive, and it looks both across symptoms and diagnoses, but also at your lifestyle, your family history, your diet, extremely detailed questions about everything. And this entire story, we also have a couple of sections where we ask specifics to timeline. So we ask questions about when people had things. So in medicine, for instance, people ask about what have you had in the past, but in a very general way.
Yes.
It's like, no, there's very few people asking you specifically, tell us, when did you, which year did you actually have this? And so we get into that kind of detail so that we can take all of that information and plot it into a patient's timeline. And it's pretty remarkable what happens.
As it turns out, there is a way.
Yes.
And that comes back to that great statement that was made by Peabody 100 years ago at Harvard at a commencement, which that paper is just, it could have written today and be just as relevant. But at the end of it, he says, the secret to the care of the patient is to care for the patient. So if you care for the patient, you have to know the patient. And if you really want to care for the patient and you're committed to the patient, you have to really know the patient.
So in your new patients, how much time might you spend with a new patient before you come up with a conclusion as to what protocols to recommend to them?
Well, usually is in the second visit. So in the first visit, I have like an hour and a half. Then you
spend an hour to an hour and a half with a patient the first visit?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, that's what it takes, and that's what functional medicine is all about, is getting that big picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah, for sure. It's impossible to do in half an hour, at least an hour. Yeah, an hour to an hour 15 usually is fine. And I finish my anamnesis usually in the second visit, when I have already ordered and I'm seeing the results of the blood test and everything. So I put everything together, the questions, the questionnaires, and the lab tests, So everything together, and I can then see the big picture.
In the past, functional medicine doctors would create a timeline on paper with their hands.
Yes.
And which is great. It's a wonderful way to dialogue with the patient and capture information and then note it down on the timeline.
I would do that, and it was always a mess.
Yeah.
Because patients would remember something oh yeah, by the way, back there, and now I'm writing on top, or I'm trying to put arrows in there.
But also there's an inherent bias, because what we're doing is we're filtering the information.
Yes.
So we only put down things that we think are important as a practitioner, right?
You're right.
And so here we take everything that the patient has said and is relevant, and actually even the process of I've heard this from many patients who've said that the process of going through that systematically, issue by issue, makes them think, and it also helps them kind of prepare for the visit.
Yes.
But anyway, so we take that information, and now there's a pattern maybe that shows up, which you would never have gotten if you were just writing it on paper. And it's a great way, because the tools are very, very graphic and visual. You can now sit with the patient and dialogue about that. And we hear constantly, I mean, people come over to us when we're at conferences and stuff and say, I had this great story where I was, showing this patient this timeline, and all of a sudden they looked on the timeline and said, oh, that's where, and sometimes it's something very significant happened. Mm-hmm. And including, I've heard over and over from practitioners that incidences of trauma or abuse or things that are highly sensitive and sometimes don't come up for 2, 3, 4, 5 visits, because it's just
they're so very deep
exactly.
Inside. Yeah.
But there's something about seeing that visual, and all of a sudden for it to trigger in the patient's head that, look at all these symptoms that have happened, something happened here, and for them to begin to associate, because I think we think, I had that, but it's not affected me. It's not affected my life. And so now if you're seeing the visual of it and you're able to look at it, and then it starts to hit home that maybe there was some implication to what happened. Mm-hmm. And so it begins to, it becomes more conscious, and then they're able to bring it up and dialogue about it. So it's helping that story get clearer earlier in the process.
We see that so many different conditions that come into our office, when we look, the immune system's gotten activated. And the way to address the immune system is not to quiet it down, but rather to reduce the need for its activation.
Right.
And that's the whole premise of functional medicine.
It is. You're right. I mean, all of the classic agents that are used, in the pharmaceutical realm for dealing with autoimmune disease are either to squash the inflammatory, the innate immune response, or to get into actual, obliteration of almost all immunity with response modifiers and biologics and things like that. And, they can be very effective from a symptom management standpoint, there's no doubt. And some people, if they're really in bad shape and sort of end stage, that may be exactly what they need as part of the overall treatment plan. But understandably, patients who get offered that as the only option, and particularly if it's earlier on in their disease course, nowadays they go right to the internet and they start looking up what are these medications, what are they all about, what are the side effects. And when they see little nasty things, little inconvenient side effects, things like leukemia and lymphoma, right? They understandably get a little bit agitated about getting on those. So they're looking for other options. And I think the functional medicine paradigm offers them exactly that.
Here's a drug. This is the answer you've been looking for. We're told, take it for the rest of your life. We're not told, where is the problem coming from? This is not the solution. This is just helping us function a little bit better. But where is it coming from? In this docuseries, you will learn where this is coming from. You apply the principles you learn here, and the result is you start feeling better. You require less and less of this medication. You go back to the doctor that prescribed you this medication and say, will you work with me and help me transition off if I don't need this. Then you can get rid of it.
Do you believe that there's evidences there that there's something wrong fundamentally with the system, potentially from a monetary standpoint?
I believe it, but it's not a belief, just a belief, it's the truth. I mean, let's just analyze what we know, what we've learned. There was a study that came out just a couple months ago in the British Medical Journal, and it was a really good study. It was an analysis of the top causes of death. And so what this study came to the conclusion of is that heart disease and cancer were the #1 and 2 killers. But the third leading cause of death was medical error. Now, what does that mean? Some people say, oh, well, they overdosed on the drug, or no, they died in surgery. No, medical error means the proper use of prescription medication. So if we look at the leading causes of death and we say, okay, how do we treat these things? Like what the system that we have, what do we use to treat these leading causes of death? Well, we use medicine, right? But medicine is the third leading cause of death. Does that make sense to you? That's data. I mean, I didn't make that up. That's raw empirical data. So what it tells me is we're doing the wrong thing. And maybe we're not doing the wrong thing 100% of the time. And I don't think doctors are out there like malintentioned. Like, I don't think there are doctors that are out there saying, haha, I'm going to put you on this drug and we're going to hurt you on purpose.
No, and like the case that you gave, they were all looking for the answer.
Right,
I mean, I found that quite a compassionate thing to do.
Right.
You know, like most people would have sent him away. And then for those, it sounds like a lot of those doctors were volunteering their time just to look at him. Right? So as in, yeah, but it's still an indictment against the system more than anything.
Well, absolutely. What the system promotes. The system promotes that drugs are the only thing that can treat, cure disease. That's what, if you look at, perfect example, look at a bottle of supplements. On the bottom of it, it's going to say FDA disclaimer, right? This product was not intended to treat, cure, or diagnose any disease. Why does it have to say that? Because medicine ensures that nobody else has the thought process that anything other than drugs can treat, cure, or diagnose disease.
It's fallacy.
It's law. And it is fallacy because we've got natural medicines that do wonderful things that are equally and sometimes more effective than prescriptive drugs.
No question.
Yeah, no question about it. And then there are plenty of other cultures that don't even dive into the drug aspect of treatment and only use medicinals and herbals and botanicals and do just as well and actually do better. I mean, America's healthcare system is ranked, I think at last time I looked at the numbers, it was ranked 37. Which is of industrialized nations. That's very poor considering we spend more than any other nation in the world on drug research and on drug usage and on medical care, right? And then we've just subsidized this care. Now we've said, let's take taxpayer dollars and give away this care that doesn't work because the system is broken, and let's give away this broken care in this broken system to people for free. And not that I don't think people should have access to some kind of care. I just don't think that taxpayer dollars should fund a system that doesn't work and that's proven itself to be ineffective. If you think about it from a business perspective, like I'm a businessman, I'm also a doctor, and I'm also compassionate, and I think there are a lot of people out there like that. But from a business perspective, medicine is the only business that continues to grow at an exponential rate despite failing miserably its customer. What other business can you think of other than government that has that track record?
The Synthroid being the #1 drug for 2013-14 is showing you that that is the only method for the majority of people for treating thyroid disease, right? But so like whereas for example something like cancer, people are getting more and more aware.
Right.
Hey, I have some options here. But with a lot of the autoimmune diseases, they literally do not believe they have any option in the world except for drug X, and you're not cool with that.
I am not cool with that. And I live in a bubble where the population that comes to me wants to take ownership. So, there is a really broad population that's just buying into the drug as the solution, and I am not cool with that. And a lot of the a lot of the drugs are, not only are they not actually addressing the root cause, they could be doing further damage, especially when we look at the fact that there are genetic underpinnings to autoimmunity. The way that that person processes the drugs may not be what the literature says it's supposed to be. And I've seen this in a number of my clients where they're actually not able to process the drugs and it's doing more harm than good.
Wow. So what is the answer, Andre?
It's multifactorial. I think that the answer is really understanding what's true for ourselves, understanding the roots of our own autoimmune expression, and being able to mitigate that by taking ownership, really understanding what's true for us, what makes us feel better or worse, and assembling the team that really sees the whole individual and who we are and is able to work through that lens.
Too often we just put people on drugs, we make their markers look better, their major health markers, but we haven't found the underlying cause and we haven't fixed it. We've done them a disservice. When I have put someone on medication, I always feel like I failed them. It's not that I'm anti-med, but it means I didn't find the underlying cause, and there probably was one that would have actually been the true solution and would have done it without medication.
That's really a bumper sticker for your practice. If I have to put somebody on medication, I feel I failed.
I have.
That's really quite profound.
I didn't figure something out.
Yes, and you need some help in the meantime for that person to get to feel better and function. And I assume you just keep diving in and
I just keep working at it. Yeah. And my goal is when I start on a med, it's like, well, hopefully I can stop this in 3 to 6 months. We'll figure it out and you won't need it anymore. And I think a lot of times they've been to all these doctors, they've been to all these specialists, they put them on drug after drug, which made them feel worse, and they're becoming hopeless. So I think that's a really important thing, to give people their hope back. That whether it's heart disease or cognitive dysfunction or depression or just pain, that most people can really transform that by following a program that is intended, that their genes have been waiting for them to do all along.
One of the biggest things I hear from patients who are brave enough to come to me, because it takes a lot of courage to say, I don't believe that other doctor or those other 10 doctors who are saying that I'm just getting older, right? I mean, that's one of the big myths and the big lies, is that disease is a natural progression of aging. I mean, we try to create diseases out of natural things in life. When a woman goes through menopause, we try to create a disease out of that and say that that somehow now needs to be medicated. Right? When a man goes through similar changes, hormonal changes as he gets older, we now call that a disease, right? And when we say we need to medicate that.
Well, that's a great idea if you want to make money out of it.
It's a perfect idea if you want to make money. I think I use the word diseasifying. We've diseasified normal processes, and we've justified that humans should be functioning at 100% all the time, and if they're not, we're going to call whatever that is a disease and create some kind of treatment. For example, depression. A person can have depression if they're sad. There's nothing wrong with the state of being sad and going through a period of depression. That's part of life experience. But a lot of doctors, a person goes in and they're depressed, maybe because they lost a loved one, maybe because they're going through a really hard time. Depression is an important emotion that they need to go through, and they need to work that out in their own mind. But the doctor's saying, no, you have this depression here. Let's cover it up. Let's call it a disease instead of the state of being human. So we've dehumanized in medicine, and we've opened the door that anything abnormal at any time is going to be considered a disease that needs to be treated. And by the way, I have that treatment in my closet, and we're going to give that to you. And I think that's a horrible approach.
I came out of medical school disillusioned. Medical school was not what I expected it to be. I thought we were going to study human physiology, and then we were going to study how people make decisions, and we were going to put those two things together, and then I would be able to help people. And it really wasn't about that. It was about a certain heuristic of, you evaluated a patient not as a whole person. You evaluated a patient as a system of organs, and you asked questions to try to single down and focus down on which organ system was having the most trouble. And then you looked in the drug book to find out, or first you made a diagnosis of what part of that organ system, what did it feel like in terms of a diagnosis and then what drugs could be used. It's actually a paradigm that I wish it were that simple, because it's easy to do. And so I finished my education, went into practice, and it was really only about 2 years into practice that I sat at the end of the day looking at the list of patients, and I thought, you know, about half these people have been better off if they hadn't come, because they're all on drugs that are causing all kinds of mischief in their life. And then I looked at the list of who was coming in the next day, and I said, I don't even know enough who to call and say, I'm only going to do mischief in your life. Why don't you not come? I didn't know enough.
Well, I don't think you can blame the physicians. I mean, maybe medical school and how doctors are trained, but I mean, I do think the vast majority of doctors go into medicine with the idea that they want to help people, and they're taught how to help people in a certain kind of way, which for some people it does work, but for many people it doesn't work. I mean, I was an emergency medicine physician before I became a functional medicine physician, and I do think that conventional medicine does a really great job at emergency care. I mean, I was a trauma ER physician, and if I got shot or was in a car accident, you know, I would want to go to the trauma center. If I had cancer or autoimmunity, I didn't know about it at the time that I was going through my autoimmune condition. I didn't know about functional medicine, but clearly if something were to happen to me in the future, it's what I would turn to. I mean, it's how I live my life every day. And it's what I hope others will turn to as well, because it does give you hope.
Chemotherapy is used in the case of autoimmunity because the very brutish premise is you want to destroy the immune system. So they're using some of the very same agents. And then, of course, cancer, you're using, as we know, right, conventional warfare, you know, chemo and radiation. It's like an insane model where not only do you feel betrayed, you have this condition, your body's attacking itself, but now the conventional medical system's saying we've got to blast this enemy within, and they literally, the collateral damage is like off the chain. Yes. Well, the metaphorics is so profound, the poetry, because this is the very institutional equivalent of the immune system, right? The conventional medical system is supposed to help take care of its damaged population, and it's feeding and profiting and amplifying the damage. So it's almost like a reiteration of the very horror of betrayal. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the betrayal theme from the condition all the way up to the misguided treatment it's powerful. Hypothyroidism is an example because that's when autoantibodies are formed against the thyroid. And so what does the conventional medical system do? They actually attempt to take the thyroid out. They even do this radio ablation. They take radioactive iodine-131, which is released in nuclear disasters. It's why everyone wants to stock up with potassium iodide when there's like a nuclear threat, because this element is what destroys the thyroid. So they find that the immune system is attacking the thyroid. And so instead of trying to find the root cause and remove it, right, they decide they're going to take the very thing that can kill your thyroid, blast it and surgically remove it, and then replace the thyroid hormone with synthetic thyroxine or Synthroid, which has a completely different tertiary conformation. And actually the primary sequence is different than human thyroxine. And they push it as if it is just as good, if not better. So in other words, it's like this cascade of betrayal. Like people's thyroids are literally removed when all they had to do is remove gluten, for example, or address some type of toxicant exposure.
I think any business that makes $100 billion annually that fails to lead their customers to some form of meaningful resolution needs to reevaluate their business model.
They'll say that they have, like, look at these examples of all these people that are better.
I agree with that. You say, look at the people whose symptoms are reduced. But what happens with their lifespan? The average autoimmune patient will have a lifespan, on average, about 26 years less than their counterpart without autoimmune disease. So you didn't really serve them. You served them by being compassionate toward their pain or toward their symptom. And that's where you made your money. You made your money to mask their body's alarms. I agree with you. It is a betrayal. Any intelligent person could analyze this from the perspective that if we only mask symptoms, And in the process of masking symptoms, we create new disease with the drugs we use to treat those symptoms. Autoimmune is notorious for this. Look at the drugs used, the immune suppressing drugs that are used to treat lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. They cause cancer. It's very clear on the warning label. Very clear. They cause cancer. They shut down the immune system.
They're known carcinogens.
Yes. Is that a solution? Is that something we want to give $100 billion a year to as the solution? When the outcomes are poor, I think we need to look at different outcomes. So, you know, the outcomes are, yeah, your pain is reduced. Yes, your rash goes away. Those aren't outcomes of resolution. Those are outcomes of symptomatic reduction. And I don't think we can base the model of treatment, again, on shutting down the body's ability to warn us.
We have an outdated clinical model, and it's really based on, you have a disease, here's a pill.
Yes.
You have a cold, take an antibiotic.
Yes.
And it has not served us well. It got us to
Look
the
at the
bottom of the
result.
list.
That's right. Look at the result.
So doing a root cause analysis, looking at, you know, a systems-based approach to the body, looking at, okay, why are you run down and you got exposed to a virus maybe when you flew to Europe last week and now you're sick with the virus, you know, just trying to understand what are the levers here. You know, how much stress do you have in your life? How are you dancing with that stress?
Yes.
How much sleep are you getting? You know, we know that you need 7 to 8.5 hours at night to really function the best.
Yes. And I would say, what are the limits that you're unwilling to acknowledge?
Yeah.
You know,
Good.
if you look at it clearly and you say, oh, I pushed the boundaries a little too far here, you know, that I've crossed my limit. You acknowledge that we're human, we have limits, and we have to take care of these bodies so they can continue to function for us.
I feel like you're looking specifically at me with that one because I'm a recovering overachiever and I don't want to have limits, right? I mean, it's sort of a human condition.
It is.
So we have to get rigorously honest about this. It's super important.
Yes.
You know, whether you're trying to get pregnant or you're facing perimenopause or you're, you know, you've got your third cold of the winter, it's important to face these.
One of my personal goals, and whether this resonates for others or they have their own in the same category, I want to make sure I can take my grandkids hiking in the Alps in my 80s.
Oh, I like that.
And in order to do that is what I do now. And in middle ages, that determines that.
Yeah.
And so for all of us, we have to take a step back from how we feel and do some independent evaluations, biomarkers, if you will, as to how our body's functioning.
Yeah. This is such an important point, and it gets back to a theme that we've had, you know, kind of a through line for our conversation, which is you want young age and middle age to last as long as possible. It's not necessarily longevity that we want, it's health span. So you hiking in the Alps with your grandchildren, that is about health span. It's about feeling fantastic, not being in a nursing home at age 80 with Alzheimer's disease or with rheumatoid arthritis. We know that these conditions are recognizable decades before you have symptoms. And so the key is to be proactive, to be predictive, to personalize this, to get super healthy as young as possible and then maintain it.
It's very easy for us to mask autoimmune problems with medications or with natural supplements. And my first 5 years of practice, I actually thought my job was to get good at symptomatic control so that within a few weeks this person could be in less pain. And that's the obvious compassionate thing to do when you're a doctor, is you want this person to feel better. Yes. But then you realize as the years go by that when those patients come back years later with even more pain than they had originally, that you've actually undermined their healing process by denying them the feedback that comes from making lifestyle changes first. Yes. So I really emphasize this, the diet, the sleep, the exercise, and meditation as the initial round of treatment while we're running labs and while we're analyzing what's actually going on as an underlying cause. And what I found in the group of patients that I've worked with more recently, the last 15, 20 years, is that when they understand how much food can relieve their pain, how much just a good night's sleep can relieve their pain, then they're motivated to continue the real treatments, which are these lifestyle changes. And they understand that there is a very real therapeutic impact of something as simple as sleep or meditation that might be even more powerful than any of the supplements or drugs.
That's been my observation, you know, that people who take the invitation that is embedded in illness and they accept it and they work with it and they shift their beliefs because of it, they go on to live really rich, fulfilling, expanded lives. But I witnessed that the people who, treat diseases as just another misfortune, and they begin to accumulate a list of the diseases that they're dealing with and the medications to accompany them, I'm not sure that's really a life they feel they would have signed up for if given the choice, right? And then they're just basically surviving until they die. And I think most of us have an innate sense that that's not all there is to this experience, right? That there's more that's possible.
I know you've heard the horror stories, all the suffering people go through. You've seen it with your loved ones and friends. Perhaps you've heard a few of the turnaround stories. That's why we're sharing this. It's not just to shock you. It's to give you the solutions you're not being told. Let me tell you about the hope. Are people really getting better? Is it truly possible? We're about to share with you some of the amazing case studies.
I got a friend who I went to school with, and he got colitis, and dealt with colitis, went down the regular route, and suddenly like three feet of his gut was like taken out. So like he'd lost a certain part of his body, and this is a friend that I went to school with who I've known since I was like 7 years old, and the plan there was just, there's no preventative action. Suddenly you have colitis, you're gonna have 3 feet of your gut out, and then now I continue to see on social media that he's in and out of hospital still, having operations every year, had problems with having a family. So I see that colitis, I see doctors in functional medicine every day reversing in weeks, if not months. And so, so that is a very stark example of why we need more of this, and it keeps me going. I personally, I've had more interactions with cancer and mental illness, but at the same time, it's sort of it's only becoming clear to what degree autoimmune disease plays a role in those kind of things too.
And I had a patient just last week with rheumatoid arthritis, which started with me like a year ago. And she was taking many medicines and lots of pain, no improvement at all. And she was in the highest dosage possible. So there was nothing that her doctor could do for her other than he was already doing. And then she came to my office. It was in July last year, and we started all the protocol, which is an individualized protocol. And when now she came back, well, every month or every 2 months she was back to the clinic. But then I asked her this last visit, how are you feeling? What was your improvement during this year? She almost cried. And for the first time, I think it was the first time she was not with her husband together. And she told me, my husband prays for you every day, because he doesn't hear me complaining and moaning and crying every day because of the pain.
I think it's particularly problematic and traumatic for younger people who are all of a sudden facing a chronic disease diagnosis. Someone in their mid to late 20s, let's say a female, all of a sudden, we tell her, you have a thyroid issue and you have autoimmunity against your thyroid, or, a young person with rheumatoid arthritis, or, I've had very young people with really bad psoriasis or something like that, and they're sort of left in a daze. Why me? Is almost, I'm young. Why do I have to deal with this kind of problem? Isn't this a problem for old people, right? And why was it me? Is this my fate? This is my genes. I have to deal with this, and there's nothing good that's going to come of it. And I think it's our job as healthcare providers to not be callous to that, and to really understand that a big part of the therapeutic intervention we offer in the healing process is to really, we're not some omnipotent, healers where we just make everything better. We're really on a journey with them. We're their health coach. And that's why I like that model of health coaching, health coaches, because it really automatically implies that expectation that the patient is going to be actively involved. It's not just going to be some doctor giving them some magic pill or some magic fix, because that rarely is the case, particularly in chronic disease. The patient has to engage with you in their recovery, you know, emotionally, behaviorally, sometimes spiritually, and you have to walk them around to that. You know, they don't just automatically get there, particularly if they're fairly young. They're not at that point of even framing up that way, you know, maturity. You know, you tend to think that way a little bit more as you get older. So sometimes it's just reassuring them, you know, listen, you're not alone in this. First of all, this is very prevalent. It's becoming more and more prevalent. And yeah, you may have this in your family history, and maybe all your older relatives and family members have this because they didn't know any better. They didn't know the things that they can do to change the outcome. Now we do know, and we'll work with you. And yeah, you might have to change a little bit about the way you eat, about the amount of stress you're under, you know, about various things in your life. But you know, these are all good things anyway. You know, you'll learn how to do these, you'll learn how to work these into your life, and you'll be healthier for it in the long run, way beyond just not having Hashimoto's thyroiditis or way beyond having rheumatoid arthritis. These are just good health practices for a long, vibrant life. And the majority of them are willing to get on board with you once they need to know you're in their camp, you're their advocate, you're not judging them, you're not there to scold them if they don't do it perfectly. And I think that's a big part of what makes a good healthcare provider, and that's really still part of the art of medicine rather than just it becoming a technical endeavor.
Well, people come to see a clinician because they hope that clinician's going to walk down a road with them to help them. And, you know, for me, I've always been taught that my life is about service. I think whether I go get my hair cut, somebody's serving me, right? They're making me feel better about myself by cutting my hair. I go buy new clothes. It's because they make me feel good for a minute, right? I think we're all about service. And so Oprah said it really well. She said, use me until I'm used up. I don't want to be used up, but I want to be used well. And so it's like serve until we can't, but also remember to renew ourselves, because that's just as important. You know, I think David Jones has said so many times that there aren't physicians who go into medicine to be bad physicians. You know, everybody goes into this with kind of a really hope that they're going to help a lot of people. And I think that everybody who's clinician really helps a lot of people. I just think that with kind of this more integrative and functional movement, that we get the people who say, yeah, but I think just keeping somebody on a drug isn't really the long-term solution always. And is there some other piece of a puzzle that I'm missing? And I think that's really what kind of binds this kind of functional medicine group or integrative medicine groups together, is that curiosity where we're always kind of saying, how can we serve better, one person at a time?
So you're probably thinking, what do I do now? You probably feel overloaded, information overload, analysis paralysis, you know, geek terms that just way too much information. We want you to know you're not alone, that there's a community here. Where should you go from here? What should you do? We're going to show you. We're going to show you what the experts say that work with people day in and day out to guide them through how to get back to vibrant health.
Information is power, but the information is only powerful if you find the information and then act on it and put that information into play. We have the tools to do that now. So if you have a family history, whether it's a family history of a lot of cancer, a lot of heart disease, a lot of autoimmune disease, there are so many upstream tools that we have now to find out, well, what is your specific risk factors as an individual? Because, like, even beyond autoimmunity, you know, risk for cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, pulmonary embolism, whatever, it's not just cholesterol, right? There's a whole bunch of different modifiable risk factors. So you have to find what are your modifiable risk factors as an individual so that we can then guide you on what lifestyle interventions, what things to change about your diet, about your stress, about your exercise, or whatever it may be. Same thing in autoimmunity. Yeah, you know, this autoimmune disease epidemic is such a big problem, and it's affecting so many people, so many patients, but so many extended families of those patients. And it has the likelihood of affecting our offspring, right? Our children, our young children we have, our children yet to come. So it's really important public health issue that needs to be turned around. And like I said before, it's not going to be turned around with a magic drug. It's going to be turned around with making the right changes to our lifestyle, our diet, our food supply, our environment. And that is not going to happen because the powers that control the food supply or the powers that control these various aspects of the environment and the economy are going to make those changes for us. It's going to be driven grassroots by people who are fed up of being chronically ill and need the system to change. So that's why a series like this is so important. You have to get the information out to the people, to the masses that are unwilling, you know, guinea pigs in this big experiment that's creating such chronic disease. And they're the ones that are going to drive the changes in the whole system by the choices they make and the dollars they spend and how they do it.
I'm so grateful to all the people that have volunteered their time for Betrayal. The researchers, the scientists, the clinicians, the patients, all of them. These speakers have made an impact on my life and on my health. And I'm grateful for you. You are becoming equipped for yourself, your family, your loved ones, so that together we can end the unnecessary suffering from autoimmune diseases.
Well, I just really appreciate Dr. Tom because he's really been proactive. He's really getting the message out. He's doing webinars and he's speaking at different conferences, and he has the research behind what he's saying, and he's giving people direction and clear guidance on how to prevent and treat autoimmune disease, not just treat the symptoms and in the past where they're just suppressing the immune system and they're not helping people get healthier. And I think the message that he's bringing is really going to bring a lot of life and a lot of hope to people. So I really appreciate what he's doing.
I've known Dr. O'Brien for a long time. Both of us met for a process of changing and thinking differently about the way we wanted to help people, yet at the same time had many similarities in what we were already doing. I think what he's been really excellent at doing is bringing that information to the population in such a way that it makes sense for them, connects with them, and empowers them to take more responsibility.
Wow. And is that do you think that he's changing lives through that?
I'm sure that if people take the recommendations that he manages to pull out from these interviews, they'll definitely change their life.
Traveling around the world, trying to make a difference. He's all about service as well. And this is really about how do we serve. It's certainly not about kind of his own personal gain. It's really about how do we serve, how do we change the world. And what I love about the world now is that medicine is happening because it's in the hands of the people. It's on the internet, it's in docu-series like this one, it's in summits, it's in radio interviews, it's in media, and people are saying, how can I be empowered to change my own health? And that's what I love about this and what I love about Tom.
He's so committed to really high quality, excellent medicine, but also he's not only an educator of patients, but he's an educator of doctors and has a wide reach so that he's always on the leading edge of whatever information is available and has this gift to really teach it to people, to take complex things and make them pragmatic and useful with patients and doctors. And that's a great gift. Not everyone can do that.
You know, he takes the information he shares so seriously. He researches it, he studies, he comes up and he presents it in ways that are easy to understand. You know, when the whole gluten thing I thought was such a complex thing, and he's broken it down into what are the key scientific points you need, what has been validated, how do you translate that information in a way that's useful? I mean, he's a genius at it. So I'm so excited that he's hosting this Autoimmune Summit and that we're going to help transform lives with the information that he's searching for.
You know, there are various heroes in that story, but I realized that Dr. O'Brien is someone that I have the most respect for because he took that hero's journey when very, very few people were willing to do that. I'm on the lookout for what works to be able to see how we can, you know, how we can really scale the impact and make a change. And, you know, Tom really showed the way forward on that. And I think, you know, his contribution to diseases beyond autoimmune disease will be felt, maybe not acknowledged, but is being felt all the time.
Yeah, and acknowledged in many cases, but isn't that awesome that it's so transcendent that you know, people may even forget where that came from, but that's showing how widespread that ripple is spreading. Dr. O'Brien, come over here, man. You don't worry about that. I didn't know what kind of impact you'd had on James's life. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I don't think you you saw that through when you thought about doing what you did. I don't think you saw that would result in something like this.
No, it's not necessary. You know, you just follow your bliss. You just do what you know you have to do. And then the ripple effect occurs, as James said. We're brothers. There's many of us. The three of us, we're brothers.
Wow. Yeah.
Everyone that sits here for these interviews, we're all family. We're all trying to carry the message out, you know, one way or another in our worlds.
Yeah. You know, when I left being an investment banker 11 years ago, partly the reason why I left is because my mentor sat next to me and he said he got drunk at his leaving dinner and he said, I've been sitting on this desk for 35 years and I feel like I wasted my life. And that was the moment I decided to quit this direction. And for a long time, I made very slow progress towards what I really wanted to do with my time. And it was Tom that showed the way to accelerate that to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And you know, that's the difference between, you know, being at the coalface and, you know, really causing a sea change. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, James. Made my day.
I love it. I think that, like, Tom, in order for you to do the work that you needed to do, you actually had to pass that banner, because you invested so much of your heart, you were able to, like, create experiences like what James had, it's just so perfect, and I really respect and admire that Dr. O'Brien, like, you know, there's stages in a man's journey. You're a warrior, and, you know, you're a cowboy, but then that you're truly in that place of imparting everything that you've done, and you're a sage, the ultimate place of being able to impart everything that you've experienced and what you've gone through in order to equip the generation of fighters that are going to take this to the finish line, and you're committed to that to the utmost.
Yes.
And then today you get the opportunity, just, you know, the rewards don't come like that kind of reward. You know, no one can pay any sum of money to give you that reward, but it comes in the form of this, which not many people ever get to experience that during their life, and you get to experience that, man.
My creed in life includes this phrase: life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch that I have a hold of for the moment, and I want to pass on to future generations. That's the goal, right? What else is there?
I want to tell you why I'm so excited about you participating in the summit, because I feel like there's so much information online. It's very confusing for you to get accurate, scientifically valid information that you can really trust. And what the doctors that have created this program are doing for you is providing a safe space where you know that you have information from leading experts and clinicians and scientists that is reliable and actionable and that you can believe. And I really strongly endorse this program.
I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. Thank you so much. I know that you've learned a lot, perhaps have a better understanding of what autoimmune diseases are in general as we move forward now with what do you do about all this. In the episode tomorrow, you're going to hear 3 major themes. The first, what is intestinal permeability, the leaky gut? I'm going to give you visuals, I'm going to give you videos, I'm going to show you, give you an understanding so that you really get what this thing is and how it contributes to the development of autoimmune diseases. We're going to talk about vitamin D, which I think is the most important vitamin that we have to make sure we get. More important than any other is vitamin D and its role in the whole development and vulnerability to autoimmune diseases. And we're going to use rheumatoid arthritis as an example. You're going to hear from people who have reversed their condition, who have reduced their pain and eliminated their pain and gotten their lives back again. And with episodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we've targeted topics with these world-famous scientists and clinicians and patients. So make sure you come back for each episode. And if you feel that you've gotten value out of today, please click the buttons below, the share, the like, the comment. Let us know what this was like for you. Tell your friends about this. Thank you so much for being here.